When you look at like a high school football field or a soccer pitch in late August, everything is just incredibly visible.
Right. Yeah, it's all right there.
Exactly. You can see the heat waves radiating off the turf,
Hmm.
the giant coolers of ice water, the way an athletic trainer intricately tapes up a sprained ankle. The entire machinery of the sport is just totally out in the open.
It's a very quantifiable environment. I mean, the
Yeah.
ambient temperature, the hydration protocols, the exact degree of that ankle sprain, it's all measurable. And human beings naturally find a lot of comfort in that kind of visibility.
We really do.
Yeah, we gravitate toward things we can categorize, chart on a clipboard and fix with a bag of ice.
But the moment you look past that physical machinery, like the moment you try to look inside the helmet or inside the mind of that teenager out there on the field, all of that comforting visibility just completely vanishes.
It really does. It's completely gone.
And we are suddenly looking at a landscape that is entirely hidden from the bleachers. So today's deep dive is about what happens in that hidden space. We're looking at a crisis happening right now all over the country that goes almost entirely ignored, which is student-athlete mental health, specifically during the brutally demanding fall sports season.
Yeah, it's such an important topic.
It really is. And we have a stack of sources today for you, including a briefing on the psychological realities of fall sports. And we're pairing that with operational data from MentalSpace School, which is a K-12 mental health infrastructure program down Georgia.
Right.
So our mission today is to explore this massive, just canyon-sized gap between physical and mental health protocols in youth sports and figure out how systemic changes can actually close it. So, okay, let's unpack this because the daily reality of high school sports right now is, it's intense.
It's incredibly intense.
Yeah, two-a-days are underway, and the sheer volume of what we are asking these kids to carry is just staggering.
We really need to acknowledge how easily we as a society just kind of overlook the minds of these young athletes.
Yeah.
I mean, we marvel at their physical endurance on a 90-degree afternoon, but we completely fail to chart the psychological load they are carrying.
Yeah.
And that load is immense.
Let's look at that invisible backpack they're wearing.
Yeah.
I mean, the physical part is obvious. They're constantly sore. Their bodies are pushed to the absolute limit.
Oh, absolutely.
But the sources point out that this physical grind is stacked on top of an already punishing structural schedule. We are talking about like up to 6 hours of practice and conditioning piled onto a full academically rigorous high school course load.
Which brings up the psychological burden, because that structural schedule is just the tip of the iceberg, really.
Right.
We're talking about teenagers whose roster spots never feel secure. Every single day of practice is essentially a high-stakes audition.
Yeah, that's a lot of pressure.
And then there is the dynamic with the coach. For a teenager, a coach's approval often stops being just mere athletic feedback and morphs into their actual foundational identity.
Oh, yeah.
So if the coach praises them, they feel they are fundamentally a good, worthy person. If the coach criticizes them or benches them, their entire self-worth just plummets.
I was actually reading this briefing and trying to put myself in those cleats. Imagine if you, as an adult listening right now, held a high-stakes corporate job.
Okay.
And your boss's daily mood didn't just dictate your paycheck, it literally dictated your value as a human being.
That's rough.
And on top of that, you could be publicly fired at any given moment right in front of all your friends for making a single mistake.
Yeah.
But oh, by the way, you have to manage all of this existential dread while simultaneously studying for AP calculus and navigating the social minefield of the high school cafeteria.
That corporate analogy captures the pressure perfectly, honestly. But we have to remember, these aren't adults with fully developed prefrontal cortexes.
Right.
These are teenagers whose brains are actively wiring their sense of self-worth based on peer and authority validation. And to make it even more complex, they are operating within a deeply ingrained culture.
Well, the culture's huge.
Yeah, our sources highlight that since about the age of 9, these kids are explicitly and implicitly trained to answer the question, "How are you?"
Yeah.
with a very specific automated phrase, which is, "I'm good."
Which is such a universal deflection. I mean, adults do this too, right?
Totally.
You ask someone how their new diet is going while they're staring longingly at a donut, and they'll say, "I'm good."
Yeah.
But when a teenager in a high-pressure environment uses it, it's a shield, like broken finger, "I'm good." Failing a class, "I'm good." Terrified of letting down your dad, "I'm good."
And that phrase creates a really dangerous blind spot for parents and educators who just take it at face value.
We just believe them.
We assume that because they're performing well on the field, they're fine. But let's look at the psychology of why they do this. Suppressing vulnerability is essentially a survival tactic in a competitive hierarchy.
How so?
Well, from a young age, they learn a brutal math. Showing weakness costs you playing time. Playing time equals status. Therefore, showing emotion is a literal threat to your social survival. So they build this impenetrable armor of, I'm good.
Which means as parents or coaches or educators, we cannot just wait for them to voluntarily tell us they are struggling.
No, they
They
won't.
just won't. We have to learn to translate this deeply conditioned athletic toughness, or what we often just write off as normal teenage attitude, into actual mental health red flags.
Exactly. Because they are conditioned to hide the struggle, the symptoms of mental distress manifest in physical or behavioral ways that routinely get miscategorized by the adults around them.
The sources list several specific things to look out for. One that really caught my eye was playing through extreme pain well past what is ordinary or safe.
Yes.
As a sports culture, we tend to glorify that, right? We see a kid playing on a badly sprained ankle, and the broadcasters, the parents in the stands, they all praise it. Look how tough he is. What a warrior.
We heavily reward it. But we really have to look at the mechanism behind that behavior. When an athlete is pushing through a level of pain that is entirely disproportionate to the situation, it's rarely just about toughness.
What is it usually?
It is often a sign of intense underlying anxiety about losing their roster spot. Yeah. Their identity is so rigidly wrapped up in being the athlete that they are willing to cause themselves permanent, long-term physical damage just to maintain that label. It's a fear response disguised as bravery.
Wow. Another major red flag in the briefing is sleep, specifically getting routinely under 7 hours. And we aren't talking about a late night studying for finals here or there.
Right.
We're talking about a baseline chronic routine of sleep deprivation. Add to that emotional volatility, like when a teenager's mood doesn't just fluctuate but rises and falls 100% based on their athletic performance that day.
Oh.
Or you might see them pulling away from their teammates and isolating themselves on the bus after a hard loss.
We also see this pre-competition anxiety manifesting in very severe physical ways.
Yeah, this part was wild.
We aren't just talking about normal butterflies in the stomach before a big game. The sources describe severe autonomic nervous system responses, nausea, vomiting, literally being unable to swallow food before a competition.
See, why does the body do that?
Yeah.
Like, why does being worried about a Tuesday night soccer game make a kid physically throw up?
It all comes down to how the brain processes threats. The brain's threat detection center, the amygdala, doesn't always distinguish between a literal physical threat, like a predator in the woods, and a profound social threat, like humiliating yourself in front of your peers and losing your identity on the team.
Oh, that makes sense.
Yeah, when the pressure peaks, the brain perceives a survival-level threat and triggers the fight-or-flight response. Blood rushes away from the digestive tract to the extremities to prepare for running or fighting. Digestion shuts down completely. That's why they feel nauseous or vomit. It is a physiological reaction to extreme psychological distress.
That makes total sense. The body is literally preparing to fight a bear, but the bear is just a Friday night football game. I want to pivot slightly to another physical aspect that just blew my mind in these sources, which is the concussion factor.
Yeah.
The briefing explicitly notes that after a concussion, if you see irritability, low mood, or a total shift in personality, that is absolutely not attitude. It warrants a clinician.
Absolutely.
Let me push back on this for a second, though. If you are a parent or a coach listening to this, how are you realistically supposed to distinguish between standard hormone-driven teenage mood swings, because let's face it, teenagers can just be grumpy, and a serious post-concussion personality shift?
It's a crucial question, and it's where a lot of adults miss the mark. The difference lies in the baseline and the suddenness of the shift.
Okay.
Yes, teenagers are famously moody, but a post-concussion emotional shift usually looks like a completely different kid. It is an uncharacteristic, explosive irritability or a sudden, deep depressive state that simply wasn't there last Tuesday. The physical trauma to the brain, the neuroinflammation, actually disrupts the frontal lobe's ability to regulate emotion. And what's fascinating here is the sheer irony of our current athletic systems.
Yeah, you mentioned this.
As you said at the start of this deep dive, athletic departments run incredibly sophisticated physical protocols. They meticulously chart heat acclimatization, they monitor hydration down to the ounce, they mandate rigid, step-by-step physical return-to-play criteria for a sprained knee.
Right, it's very exact.
But when a brain injury occurs, they chart the physical symptoms, headaches, light sensitivity, dizziness, and entirely ignore the neurological and emotional fallout.
It's just staggering. The mental health equivalent of those physical protocols just doesn't exist in most athletic departments.
And that is a gap that must be closed proactively before the season even starts. We cannot accept a culture that perfectly meticulously rehabs a torn meniscus, but tells a brain-injured, depressed kid to just shake off a bad attitude.
Well, because the blind spot is so vast, and these signs are incredibly subtle, hidden behind that "I'm good" armor, who is actually in the position to spot them?
Yeah, that's the big question.
The sources are definitive on this. A school counselor sitting in an office on the third floor of the academic building is never going to see these subtle locker room shifts. The single fastest lever for changing this culture is the coach.
Because the coach operates at the very center of the athlete's ecosystem. They are the ultimate authority figure in that specific hierarchy.
Yeah, the briefing actually states that coach credibility is the entire ballgame. Like if a coach stands in the locker room and says out loud that talking to a mental health professional is a standard, expected part of training, the athletes will believe it.
They absolutely will.
They will trust that coach over a beautifully designed, well-meaning counseling poster hanging in the school hallway any day of the week.
This raises a really important question about social proof and how we communicate with young people. I mean, why does the poster fail? It fails because it lacks authority within the specific social structure that matters to the athlete. A counselor, to a football player, is often viewed as an outsider. The coach is the ultimate insider.
That is so true.
When the coach actively endorses mental health maintenance as a component of athletic conditioning, not as a weakness but as a performance strategy, it instantly removes the stigma.
Here's where it gets really interesting. The sources lay out a very clear operational playbook for athletic directors and districts to utilize this coach-driven leverage.
Yes, the playbook is key.
First, preseason messaging about mental health has to be delivered directly by the coaches. Second, those return-to-play protocols we just discussed must explicitly include mood and behavior checklists so post-concussion depression isn't ignored.
Crucial.
And third, and this is a big one, there need to be defined psychological paths for things like roster cuts and season-ending injuries. The source actually calls these events identity-level losses for a teenager.
And that terminology is incredibly precise.
Earlier, I compared the sports schedule to a high-stakes corporate job. Well, when a teenager gets cut from a team they've played on for 5 years or blows out their ACL, it's not just a bummer. It's the equivalent of a sudden, unexpected career termination for a 40-year-old adult.
Yeah, it's devastating.
But instead of an adult who has a multifaceted life, this is happening to a teenager whose brain has literally wired its entire social identity around this sport.
Which is why the psychological fallout is so severe. During adolescence, the brain is undergoing massive social and emotional development. Their peer group and their perceived role within it is everything.
Right.
One day, you are the starting point guard. Your entire social circle, your daily schedule, and your neurological reward system are tied to that fact.
Right.
The next afternoon, you tear a ligament, and it's instantaneously gone. You are suddenly on the outside looking in.
Wow.
We know these identity-level losses are statistically guaranteed to happen every single season. Therefore, it basically borders on educational malpractice not to have a planned psychological protocol ready for them.
But there is a very necessary boundary here that the sources emphasize, and I want to be clear about it. Are we asking a 25-year-old assistant track coach to suddenly become a licensed therapist? Because that seems like a recipe for disaster.
Oh, not at all, and that's a vital distinction. The sources demand absolute clarity of roles. A coach's job is to notice the signs, to destigmatize the act of getting help, and to refer the athlete. That's it.
Just notice and refer.
Exactly. Diagnosis and treatment belongs strictly to licensed clinicians. The messenger matters immensely to get the athlete in the door, but the professional must be the one sitting in the chair once they cross the threshold.
Which brings us to the most practical, glaring logistical problem in this entire deep dive. Having the coach on board is fantastic. Spotting the autonomic nervous system red flags is great, but it is entirely useless if the student-athlete has nowhere to go.
Exactly.
And this brings us to the operational data from MentalSpace School.
Because you can shatter the stigma all you want in the locker room.
Yeah.
But if the logistics of actually attending a therapy session don't work, the athlete still won't get help.
Yeah. The sources outline a massive logistical hurdle that most people never even consider, which is time.
Time is everything.
If a therapy session conflicts with a 4 p.m. practice, the athlete will simply not attend the therapy. They will choose practice every single time to protect that roster spot.
Yeah, they can't risk it.
So MentalSpace School, which partners with school districts in Georgia, realized they had to build a clinical layer that works specifically around the athletic schedule. They offer same-day teletherapy in the early mornings before school or late in the evenings after practice is completely over.
If we connect this to the bigger picture, it proves a vital point. Infrastructure and accessibility are just as critical as reducing stigma. You have to remove the operational friction.
Yeah.
Offering teletherapy strictly outside of practice hours does exactly that. The athlete doesn't have to choose between their mental health and their starting position.
So what does this all mean on a systemic level? Because this isn't just a crisis hotline. The program provides dedicated teams of licensed, culturally competent therapists assigned to specific schools, handling everything from crisis intervention and violence prevention to staff wellness and family counseling.
It's very comprehensive.
And it's helping these districts meet compliance deadlines. The sources mention something called HD 268, which, for those outside of Georgia, is a looming state mandate requiring schools to have actionable, concrete mental health support infrastructures in place by July 2026.
Right.
Programs like this provide the actual framework to meet that legislative mandate while keeping everything FERPA compliant, meaning a teenager's highly sensitive therapy notes are kept completely walled off from their academic files and their teachers.
The privacy aspect is paramount, especially for teenagers who are already paranoid about being judged. But there's another layer of friction that this operational model solves, and might be the most significant one of all, which is the financial barrier.
Oh, yeah. Sports are already draining families dry. If you have a kid in travel sports or high school athletics, you know exactly what I mean.
So expensive.
The gear, the travel fees, the endless fundraisers. The last thing these parents need is a massive out-of-pocket medical bill. What stands out in the MentalSpace model is how they tackle this. They integrate with major commercial health plans like Blue Cross, Aetna, Cigna, but the absolute game changer is that they make it $0 for families on Medicaid.
That's incredible.
By removing that financial friction entirely, they aren't just offering a service, they are fundamentally opening the door for families who would otherwise just suffer in silence.
It democratizes access to care. When a coach makes that critical referral we talked about earlier, they don't have to carry the guilt of wondering if the family can even afford a $200 an hour out-of-pocket specialist.
Right.
The pathway is cleared, both logistically and financially.
And while the sources are very careful to state that no medical promises are ever guaranteed because, mental health is incredibly complex, the operational data so far is compelling. They are seeing huge improvements in school attendance, significant reductions in reported anxiety, and high family satisfaction rates.
Those aren't just abstract statistics either. Those numbers represent actual teenagers who are returning to their emotional baseline.
Yeah.
Teenagers who are able to finally enjoy their sport and their lives rather than just surviving them in a state of constant low-level panic.
So as we wrap up this deep dive, I want to talk directly to you listening right now. You might not be a high school athlete. You might not have kids anywhere near a soccer pitch. But the mechanics of what we've discussed today matter profoundly because this is a masterclass in what happens when high-pressure environments tie a human being's performance to their fundamental identity. Whether it happens on a Friday night football field, in a cutthroat corporate boardroom, or during a grueling medical residency, the lesson remains exactly the same. Addressing the whole person, their hidden psychological reality, and not just their highly visible physical output, isn't some soft luxury. It is a structural necessity.
It truly is. And I'd leave you with this final thought to mull over, looking toward the future.
Okay.
We have spent the last 50 years perfecting the physical conditioning of athletes. We know exactly, down to the cellular level, how to build a faster sprinter or a stronger lineman. But if schools and programs eventually manage to normalize mental conditioning as thoroughly and systematically as they have physical conditioning, it completely upends the landscape of sports.
Wow, yeah.
Will the future's most elite athletes simply be the ones who are the most emotionally regulated? Could proactive systemic mental health resources actually become the ultimate competitive advantage on the field?
That is a fascinating question because at the end of the day, that visible field, the turf, the heat waves, the perfectly taped ankles is only half the game. The real battle, the one that dictates every single move they make, is happening entirely out of sight right there inside the helmet. Thank you so much for joining us on this deep dive. Keep questioning, keep exploring, and we'll see you next time.